I'm Caitlin from Stitched Up, and today we're going to be doing needle felting. This technique is great for repairing or embellishing knitwear. It's really easy for beginners and you can get really creative with it too. So for this tutorial, you need something to work on. I've got a jumper here, but anything woolen will work. You'll also need some felting wool, a base sponge. Completely optionally, you can use some tailor's chalk to mark out your design, and you'll also need felting needles. I've got a 4-pronged one here as well, and then also an individual here, and I'll show you the difference between these as we go along. So before we start, I'm just going to show you a couple of examples so you know what we're trying to achieve here. Firstly, I've got a cashmere jumper that's had a couple of moth holes in it. So what we've done here is added some felted circles to add to the design of the jumper, but also to cover up any of those holes that were in there. The second thing we have is this project that I'm in the middle of at the moment. And this jumper was one of my favourite jumpers, and then one day I managed to leave it on the side and spill a whole cup of tea over it. So then it became pretty stained, and I wanted to cover up that stain and make it a little bit less obvious. So you can see here where I've drawn around where the stain is, and that's just tailor's chalk, so that's gonna wash out. And then I've just used felting wool to go over all the bits, not completely cover the stain, but just cover up the main patches so it's less obvious when I'm wearing it. This jumper also ended up having a hole in it. So you can see here, more obviously, that's my finger there, where I'm going to use this shape. This is just a half-inch shape to keep adding to it, and then once that's completely covered, that hole will be secure and invisible, so no one will know that there's a hole there. So let's get started with our felting. We'll take our jumper and lay it out, and my plan is to add some triangle bits at the bottom, and then I'm going to just close up this decorative slit here, and then maybe add some of the decorative bits as well. So this is where you could draw out your design with tailor's chalk if you wanted to, but personally I don't think it's necessary, and I think it's kind of better just to freestyle it as you go along. So to start, I'm going to take my sponge, and this is just any kind of sponge. We've got another one here which is just like what you would use for like chair sponge or like upholstery sponge. But it's just because you need a base, something for your needle to go into. So you put that between the two layers of fabric. So I've got the base of my jumper there, and then put it in between, so you're only going to catch one layer of fabric as you go. And you want where you're going to work on just to be on that sponge there. So then to start, we're going to take our needle felting wool. So it comes like this, and you only really need tiny bits at the start, so you just rip it off just like that, and you just want to start off with a small amount, smaller than you'd think, because we're just going to build it up as we go. So if you start off with too much at the start, then it's just going to make it more difficult for you, and it's also it might mat the wool before you secure it to your jumper, so it won't be as easy. So you're just going to use our fingers to just give a rough outline of the shape, and you don't need to worry about it too much because we're going to adjust it as we go, so even if you're not too happy with it, it's quite easy to fix as we go along. So then we have our felting needles. So we've got this one here, kind of scary looking one. They're both that use the same needles, but the handles are just different. So for this one here, it unscrews like so, and then that allows you to take out your needles here. Then you have one felting needle, and these needles are really, really sharp, and they have notches on them, and these notches mean that when you poke through into the fabric, then they'll grab the fibres of the wool and really finely tangle the wool fibres with your base fabric. And then by repeating this action and bringing it up and down through the fabric, you're going to secure this wool to the bottom fabric. And then as we layer it up more and more, we can get those nice colour block shapes. So then I just put it back in like this, and then you can just screw these ones on And then for this needle, it's the same thing, but it's just an individual. So whereas this one's good for getting the base, like the start of it on, because you have 4 things doing the same job. This one's good for if you've got any wispy bits or you want to do more intricate details, then just using one is quite good. So this one pops out like this, and then it comes like this, and then you have to just take this off. This is a tapered piece of wood. So then you want to, when you're ready to needle felt, then you want to put the top of your needle into the thinner end of this piece of wood, and it just slots in, and then that means you can slot your needle into here, and then the tapered means that it'll just slot in like that, and then that's ready to go. You need to be really careful with these needles because not only are they really sharp, they have those notches on, so if you do miss and get your finger, it's kind of like a serrated blade, so it will be quite a nasty cut. So because I'm starting with just getting the bulk of it down, I'm going to use this 4-pronged one. You need to keep your fabric in kind of taut, but you also want to mind that your fingers are nowhere near your blades. You can get some little like leather or leatherette finger covers just to stop that, but generally you can just keep your hand well out of the way. Just make sure you're paying attention when you do this, and then you literally just go in and out of the fabric over and over again. So there you go, I've got my first one there, and then once I've done it a couple of times, I just want to make sure I'm lifting it up out of the sponge underneath, because otherwise it might get caught in the sponge beneath. And so you can see just with those few stabs, it's still a bit wispy, but you can see that it's started to come through on the other side. So I'm just going to carry on doing that until it's nice and matted, and then add bits as I go. So when I started this, I wanted a triangle, but as I'm going, I'm kind of enjoying the almost like a cheetah spot, kind of half curve. So the beauty of this is you can kind of let the fabric guide you. So I'm going to make it more into that shape as I go. And you can keep just shaping with your fingers. Shape up the edges a little bit, I can use this individual needle. Of course, if you only had one of them, you could just take it out, so you just had one needle on this one and save you buying 2 different handles. But I'm just using that one to neaten up the edges. And you can look on the back here, it's starting to really come through there. You can kind of use your needle to guide out where you want it to go, and that's what having that individual needle is good for. And you can see how quickly that's just come together, and you can just use tiny bits of felting wool to patch up any not as full bits. And then you can move on to your next shape. And you can just play around with laying it on the jumper until you find out where you want it to go. If you do put a few in and then suddenly you're like, oh, disaster, I don't want it to be there. At the beginning it's quite easy to pull out, so then you can start again. It gets a bit harder when you've matted it in properly. And there you go, it really is as simple as that. And you can just keep going and keep going until it's secure. You can't get any of these bits. You're not going to be able to pull out the fabric like I did before, and you've got it matted in nicely. And then you'll get these bits that, because they're tangled in and basically really finely knotted into your fabric, that they're going to stay there for a long time. So we're onto our sleeves now, and this big bit of sponge isn't going to fit into between that sleeve. So I have a smaller bit of just cut up chair sponge that will go in, but if you are at home and you don't want to, you don't have any of this, you can always just use a kitchen scourer, just a clean one. This isn't quite as close sponge as this kind of sponge, so this isn't going to last as long. But if you're just starting out and you kind of want to try it out on just a little bit, then that might be a good place to start, just until you get a feel for it. But it will be better just to use this kind of thick one. So I'm going to pop that in there. So again, I've got this, it's not, I'm separating my two sides of my sleeve so that I'm not going to mat them together. I just want to line it up for that. And I'm going to, this is just a decorative slit, but I've decided I don't want it, so I'm just going to felt over it. And this would be the same principle as if this were a hole as well. So it's the same as we did before. Just going to take a little bit at a time. I like to start with outlines because then even if you've got a wispy bit in the middle, you've kind of done the hard work because you've worked out what you want the shape to look like. But it is the same thing. So again, make sure that your hands are out of the way. These are very sharp. It's a little bit trickier on this because I've got a seam here. So I'm just going to start it off with the less scary individual needle. Oh, and you can see I've actually bent that there. So I should have gone even slower. So because that bent, obviously not what I wanted to happen, I've gone and got a slightly thicker felting needle, and that's just for more coarse wool and also for the thicker base fabrics. And it's just because I've got this seam here, so this bit is really thick, and that's why I'm struggling just there. But then I'm going to be really gentle with this one. And you want to keep pulling out in the same way so that you're not completely matting to the sponge behind. And it doesn't matter that I've got this wispy bit here because I can just fold it over. And what we want to do is, even though there's a gap here, if we keep felting on this area, then it's just going to become one sheet, and then this gap will be secured. And that's the same principle for if you had a hole in your jumper, you would just felt over it, and it would tangle into the sides of the fabric that you've already got, and then secure it so you wouldn't ever know that there's a hole there. So there we go. After a bit of time, it takes some patience with this, you'll see that we've closed this up. So I've got it secure to the side here, and then this is basically made of matted fabric of felt. I'll just show you another example on that other project that I was working on, just as another example of fixing up a hole. So on this slightly more colourful jumper here, I have this yellow shape, and I've made the shape specifically to fix up this hole here, where you can see my finger. So I'm going to do the same thing, slightly easier on a small hole, but again, because it's in the sleeve, I'm just going to need a slightly smaller bit of sponge. So lay it nice and flat on top, and then just grab some wool and the same thing, small amounts, and we're just going to poke that in. And as we saw with the other jumper, that's going to make a mat over where the hole is, and then it's going to just cling onto the fabric that's around it. And when you're going into a small bit of sponge like this, always keep your fingers where you can see them, because the sponge, the needle is quite long, so it can come out the other end. You just want to be really careful that you're not accidentally getting yourself. And once we're happy that that's all nice and secure, we can take our sponge out and we can see that that hole is covered up, and from the inside as well. Where there once was a hole there, now we've just got a matted bit of felt, so that that's not going to go anywhere now. And that really is all there is to it for needle felting. It's a really simple technique to get down, but it's great because you've got a lot of creativity of where you can go with it. It can be as loud as this jumper or as simple as just a few little dots or lines. It's a great one to have fun with.